Welcome to a special episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. As we close out 2024, we're taking a heartfelt look back at an incredible year filled with so many memorable moments. This episode is a montage of highlights, some of our favorite episodes, and standout stories from the past year. Of course, there were far too many favorites to fit into one episode, but these moments showcase the passion, adventure, and community spirit that define Wild Things and Wild Places.
The timeliness of this could not be more imminent for me. Earlier this week, a week ago today from the time you're hearing this, February 13th, it was reported that the Sheridan police officer, Sergeant Nevada Krinke, was shot and killed in the line of duty after attempting to serve a trespass warrant. Son, why don't you come with me? I knew that there was something that wasn't right, that there was an emergency or something that had occurred. The best way I could describe it is it's a wound that will scab over, but it never heals. The loss of life in the line of duty and the tragedy that inflicts upon those that are left behind is deep. And it's something you carry every day. We know our freedoms exist because we've always known them to exist. But it's mindful to be aware that they come at a great cost. Being proud that we live in this nation, knowing that it has come at this cost, and that we're thankful for the men and women that continue to serve in these capacities in these various functions on a daily basis. When tragedies like this rock your core, it changes who you are. It changes what you stand for. It changes the namesake you represent. It changes the optics of the things that you thought were important. But at my father's funeral, when they had an entire detail there playing bagpipes, from that point forward, all I could think of when I heard bagpipes was my father's funeral. There is no greater responsibility, in my mind, for our communities, for our nation, than law and order. This service and this sacrifice is held in the highest regard. Joining me today on Wild Things and Wild Places, I got the Sheridan Chief of Police, Travis Koltiska. Howdy, Travis.
How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for taking some time to visit with me. You know, in anticipating that we would be having this conversation, I thought we probably need to reference maybe how this came to be. Certainly I'd like to give a nod to Director Brian Nesvik with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for connecting these dots. But you and I had a conversation. I think that's probably where we should start, and then we can go from there to talk about what we want to move forward.
Sure. This whole thing actually started from tragedy, and everybody's aware, and at least in this region and across the country, the loss that the Sheridan Police Department experienced back in February. We lost an amazing individual. Sergeant Nevada Krinke was shot and killed in the line of duty on February 13th, and it's just really left a big hole in everybody here in our community, and I think across the state. And as the chief, you're always looking at ways to honor those that have served you in any capacity. And I started exploring ways to honor Nevada in the form of providing scholarships through our Police Protective Association in Nevada's name. Nevada, he served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the very distinguished 82nd Airborne as an infantryman. And one of the things that he took the most pride in was protecting school children who never got to attend school in that country before.
I certainly, as a man of faith, believe that things happen that aren't coincidental, and those connections, certainly, I believe the people you interact with, there's a bigger power at play there. The ultimate sacrifice, one giving their life for their community and what they uphold in law and order. Let's show our reverence and our respect and honor for this great nation and the recognition that it comes at the ultimate sacrifice to have the blessings that we have. At the end of the day, that's our charge, isn't it? To make this world a better place and doing good things for great causes. Joining me today as a guest, Dave Kavanaugh, who hails from Winchester, Virginia, leader and chapter chair of the Blue Ridge chapter of the Muley Fanatic Foundation. Dave, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much, Josh.
No, it's a pleasure to have you carve some time out so we can visit. Of course, big news this week that came out from the Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program, federal government effort that allocated $24.3 million to the application that Wyoming had submitted on the Kemmer
189 to I-80 Wildlife Crossing Project. And what's relevant to that with the Virginia chapter is that when this priority was deemed priority numero uno a couple of years ago by the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, the state of Wyoming for wildlife crossings efforts, the Blue Ridge chapter was the first chapter, but not only the first chapter, but also the first deposit into that savings account to start generating revenue. You have a chapter in Virginia contributing to a project that's been deemed a priority in the state of Wyoming.
The main positive impact of this crossing is just immeasurable and extremely impactful in the future for the critters in this area.
It is a little unorthodox to have an effort that is being led in an area where mule deer do not even exist for the conservation of mule deer. But I think that speaks volumes of the support base and the efforts that you have had, the strides and the impact that your chapter has had in mule deer conservation out west. It's nothing short of profound. And I continue to tell others how flattering that is, that there is this interest and effort to want to do mule deer conservation when you don't live here.
It's important to really lay the expectation out there. And at the end of the day, I just have always look for passion and commitment. And when you find those people, the success lies in the team, not in the eye.
There are a lot of character building things that come from being able to be an ethical hunter that, in my mind, it goes across many lines of who we are as people, as Americans, as citizens, and I think it's all positive.
So I think we all need to roll up our sleeves and be part of that effort. My oldest grandson, he was gifted with a BB gun Red Ryder at the ripe old age of about 5 months, and we're now starting to shoot that BB guns again. There's no time to waste.
I thought it would be no better expert to talk about weather-related impacts than truly what I believe to be the voice of weather for the state of Wyoming, also covering Colorado, parts of western Nebraska. Don Day. Welcome, Don.
Hi there.
Glad to have you. I really wanted to talk to you on a couple of different fronts. Primarily, you certainly are well aware of the impacts that wildlife suffered at the consequences of the winter 22-23. And that was well documented. I think that really was profound, is probably the best adjective for that. Probably the most we've ever seen, I would think, in both of our lifetimes.
We can safely say that we were 40 years since we had seen winter like that. So that's they say what a generation is 30 years. So that was more than a generation since we had that type of magnitude of winter. We call it analog forecasting, which is let's look at what we have experienced. What do we have on record? Unfortunately, we really don't have a lot. There really wasn't a science of meteorology until the Wright brothers invented an airplane, and we had to quickly figure out, we need to figure out this weather thing. If you only base your weather forecasting on a model, you're a modelologist. You're not a meteorologist. Anybody who's done a lot of modeling, whether it's weather or anything else, will tell you that all models are wrong. Some are helpful. I will tell you that there wasn't one meteorologist or climatologist who got anywhere close to predicting correctly what happened last winter. That equator area between South America and Australia is like it's like the engine of the car of the earth. This could be the year where it feels like spring and we have a snowstorm on Mother's Day, to where it doesn't really want to end, so to speak. What made it so snowy in Rawlins made it less snowy in Laramie because of the snowy range. The winds were upslope into Rawlins and Saratoga and Baggs while driving that Pacific moisture in, but the air went downhill on the other side of the snowy range, and that downsloping just basically eats the moisture. Being a meteorologist is like being a pilot. When you get in the airplane and you see there's a kid in the cockpit, looks like he's about 18, you really want the guy with the gray hair.
That's exactly what I want.
Because it's like, yeah, he's been through a lot. Weather affects everybody and everything. That kind of is, it goes without saying. But especially living in Wyoming in this part of the country, I think the thing that was most surprising to me is how impactful the weather is on just day-to-day existence, whether you're a mule deer, whether you're rancher. The hardest work is before a storm. Once a storm hits, your work is done. Your job is to get people prepared.
We've had scientists, we've had decision makers, we've had policy makers, we've had chapter volunteer efforts associated directly with Muley Fanatic Foundation. And then there's been those campfire chats where we really tried to highlight just the love of hunting and our heritage that we value so much. And so this episode it's none of the above, and it's by design. I've got a gentleman who I have a great regard and respect for that is a true outdoorsman in every sense of the word. And I'm excited to be able to introduce Alan Center from Riverton, Wyoming. Alan, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here this morning.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And again, I think that what makes this so unique is that you're not representing a product, you're not representing an initiative or an effort specific to mule deer. You're just an avid outdoorsman. You've made your living in the outdoors. You're a well-renowned photographer. You've got a great relationship with the reservation and the tribal leadership. And your story is worth telling to me.
Born and raised. My father was born and raised in this area. My grandfather came from Nebraska when he was a little kid. I had my grandfather's grandfather was a soldier. He was here in the late 1800s. He actually was one of the soldiers that helped clean up after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. I go back out some pretty deep roots that way on my mom's side. But my family's been here since Riverton started and grew up here on the reservation, and it's one of the best places in the world to live. You can ride all day on horses and never cross a road. It's just the most amazing place. You have a job if you want one. There I was. I had that set. And then, of all things, I ran into Pete Peterson, who had the CM Ranch up in DuBois, where I took the Packer Guide class. And he offered me a job as a wrangler. So I got to do that for the summer and got to wrangle dudes and go into hunting camp that fall. When you're a 19-year-old kid, you're not afraid of anything. And I had a bunch of backpacker food in my pack horses, and off I went, and I covered pretty much that country.
Expansion is amazing, isn't it?
It is.
If you look back at the turn of the 20th century, estimate 1.8 billion people on the planet. 50 years later, 2.8 billion. And then 50 years after that, we're at 7.8 billion.
I don't think Wolverines are eating small children at bus stops yet or anything like that. How are the animals going to survive with all the gear and the scopes and the binoculars and the GPSs? And it's a known fact that if you really hammer the coyotes, a lot of times you end up with more than what you started with. I stick my tongue out and breathe in, tasting fish, deer, and sky.
Public land is, in my mind, it's our greatest national treasure. Dr. Kerr, thank you for your time today. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So let me just give the listeners a little backdrop on how this came to be, because this actually goes back to a previous podcast that you had actually listened to, and I was curious how you had heard about it. But a podcast that I had done with the vice president of Jonah Energy, Paul Ulrich, 4 or 5 weeks ago. How did you hear about that one?
I think I saw either Paul or Jonah Energy shared it on their LinkedIn page. So I was listening to it while I was driving one day. I was actually back out in Wyoming the last few weeks. And yeah, one of the drives I listened to it and thought he had a lot of good stuff to say. And I figured I'd reach out and see if you needed any updates on some of the great reclamation work they're doing out there in Sublette County.
Perfect segue, because that's exactly where the conversation went from there between you and I. Paul and I were able to visit a lot about how oil and gas and the conservation communities really work together and are really not at the opposite end of the spectrum, as so many sometimes want to put. Wyoming, having a third of the world surviving greater sage grouse, really was in the driver's seat, and everyone was looking at Wyoming like, how are you going to figure this out without Big Brother coming in and saying, this is how we're going to do it moving forward? And
one of the things I'm most excited about with what I get to do is reclamation and restoration. That's a different discipline than conservation, but there's so much overlap in it, and very cognizant of the fact that I have rubber on the soles of my shoes and I drive a vehicle and I need the fossil fuels. A little extra effort up front saves a whole lot of effort down the line. Out of all the animals on planet Earth, not only are they the most diverse, but they respond the most rapidly to environmental change. One of the things that I find, like these sarcophagiid flies, they're the flesh-eating flies. The only thing we know about them is from forensic entomology, where we know that their larvae grow in the sarcophaguses of warm-blooded mammals. Local mountain mahogany seed does a lot better than outsourced mountain mahogany seed. If we get mountain mahogany from Texas, it just doesn't seem to grow up at 7,200 feet in these kind of harsh, cold winter conditions. People say, man, we just always thought that oil and gas is just fossil fuels and it's bad. I'm like, no, they have like pretty highly educated and highly intelligent people making these decisions and learning and growing.
What's good for the bird is good for the herd. Been a barrage of just rare earth mineral development on the horizon, uranium, everything under the sun. It just seems like is grabbing headlines right now about the wonderful natural resources that Wyoming is host to.
Joining me today, I've got Dan Gabe. He is the Executive Director for Coloradoans for Responsible Wildlife Management. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I had a chance to visit with you a couple of weeks ago at our Muley Fanatic Foundation chapter event that was held in the Loveland area, bringing kind of our Greeley and our Denver chapter efforts into one event.
We're referencing it as the hunting ban, the Colorado hunting ban, because those initiative numbers will change. And so we're trying to get people to not concentrate on numbers so much as the problem.
When you look at these initiatives, I mean, they are littered with misinformation being utilized and weaponized, coining such terms as trophy hunting, if you will, to really mislead the public and potential voters. The ramifications of impact that this could potentially have could potentially span across multiple states.
It got us to a point to where we became not only the tip of the spear, but the shaft, and even sometimes I think the arm that throws it. And the North American model is something that should be coveted and should be pedestalized, not bastardized. Wildlife commissions, parks and wildlife commissions, game agency commissions have the ability to make the decisions on behalf of the agency that are best suited for the agency's missions and objectives. The general public doesn't have that knowledge. People want wildlife. They want to know that it's properly taken care of and that we are stewards of it.
Science-based wildlife management is what allows for us to have the resources that we have. It's like killing the frog in boiling water. It's a slow thing, but you look back now, even yourself, acknowledging that 30 years ago we should have been maybe a little bit more organized.
If kids can't get firearm liability insurance, maybe they shouldn't be able to do hunter education. Maybe they shouldn't be able to hunt. These are animal extremists bringing those things to our table. People say we can't make a difference, and I would beg to differ. We're in a state in Colorado that I didn't grow up in. I didn't grow up in this environment. I grew up here, but it's not the Colorado I grew up in. If I want to turn around and save any of what we had, we have to turn around and put a stand up.
Let's not be 30 years from now saying 30 years ago, like you were referencing a few minutes ago, I wished I would have seen this then, or I wish I would have acted then, or we should have acted then. Today's the day. This is a clarion call for all hunters, anglers, and conservationists across the United States. Support is absolutely imperative in this battle against misinformation, misleading information, and the weaponizing and the manipulation of that information to be able to maintain the preservation of our rich wildlife heritage.
I have a guest today that is not unfamiliar to Wild Things and Wild Places. And of course, I am talking about the director-to-be, Wyoming Game and Fish newly appointed director as of September, Angie Bruce. Welcome, Angie, and congratulations.
Thank you, Josh. It is good to be here and talking with you today.
And I'm sure you have been overwhelmed with the amount of support and just accolades that come with such an announcement like that.
Oh, yes, Josh. It definitely was extremely emotional for me getting that call from the governor. I think if I think back on that day, I think I might have screamed on the phone, being able to lead what I view as the strongest and most passionate and dedicated state game and fish agency in the nation. I had a lady walk up to me and say, "Hey, I saw the press release. Congratulations." And she really focused on that piece about being the first woman. And it struck me pretty hard that, wow, this does mean something to people. Hopefully, by me being the first woman, it's really showing and demonstrating a path for future women down the road as well. With 50% of the land in Wyoming under federal management, it's definitely a priority to continue our efforts to influence the condition of that habitat on those lands in order to benefit wildlife. And so it's not a matter of if they need to delist it, it's a matter of when. And it should happen. We have the data to prove it will happen. We have a lot of tools we've used in the past that aren't working as effectively. So how can we be creative? How can we offer landowners access incentives that still allow them to harvest and operate the way they want, but allow some access as well? One of the things I love about Wyoming is our citizens are very knowledgeable and very passionate about wildlife, and they trust and value the work of the department to manage the wildlife. Take a kid or two with you. Get the younger generation understanding both the need to volunteer and be engaged in something they care about. I'm really a big proponent of explaining the why, letting folks know this is why the decision is made. This is what I'm thinking. This is the why. You may disagree with it, but I think having all the information is very valuable.
Joining me today on Wild Things and Wild Places, a man who we have had several times before, have certainly referenced him several times before, the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Kevin Monteith.
Morning, Josh.
Is it still morning?
Wait, it's afternoon. What happened?
Just flew by. It's the end of the week thing, remember?
That's right. It is the end of the week thing.
Yeah.
That's right. Thanks for having me on again.
No, I'm glad to have you on. And we have not actually done an episode since Mule Deer Days. Of course, you were heavily involved with Mule Deer Days, not only you yourself individually with some of the seminars, but also your team, the Monty Shop, very well front and center there at that event. But I wanted to circle back with you, particularly in regards to the content of this episode, because of the timing. It is starting to get to that middle point of summer, but I thought it might be worth us just getting in and diving into some of the details of what has probably been some pretty historic data sets that I think you've probably compiled just based off the conversations you and I have had individually.
Yeah, no, agreed. You can't predict the future when we're working in these natural systems. We've had it happen multiple times where we have moms and their daughters giving birth on the same day within a quarter mile of each other, because daughters have inherited that summer range from mom and continue to live in that place. Animals are fatter than we've ever seen. We're seeing high levels of survival, and we're seeing lots of indicators that point in a positive direction relative to recovery. Big, robust fawns is also an indicator of fat moms being able to allocate and invest heavy in offspring, which means that's like tossing them the silver spoon right out of the gate. One of the leading causes of fawn mortality during those years are stillborns. And it's just a matter of mom's ability to put viable young on the ground. Understanding what that means and what we can do to mitigate, I think, is really important. When you lose all the animals that had the memory of that place and called that place home, what does that mean for us long term?
Got a great guest in line today and a great conversation that I think you'll find to be fascinating and thought-provoking, and something certainly I would hope you would want to share. Joining me today from the Wyoming Migration Initiative, writer and filmmaker, Greg Nickerson. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, Josh. Thank you for having me on the show, and I'm excited to talk about mule deer today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about mule deer, and specific to the work that you do that certainly engages and gathers a lot of conversation, a lot of interest, and I believe what is probably very thought-provoking in many circles.
It's an effort at the University of Wyoming to track these migrations, map the information, and share that information with the public to further sound wildlife management. When we tell these stories and have the science in hand, that it can really empower millions of dollars for conservation. And that's so awesome. But when you can just pull out one deer, tell that one individual story, then it becomes a character that people can really hook onto. When you put all that together in an animation with some storytelling about the conservation, it's been really successful. And we've seen some of these animations have over 1 million views on the social media channels. And when you put all those together, it's over 4 million views that have happened on those animations. Spring migration is what allows those animals to locate the best, most nutritious food they're going to find all year. The analyses of all these millions of GPS points has shown that there's just very rare crossing of Interstate 80. And that's particularly bad for the pronghorn that need to run away from snow and find those little patches of winter habitat that are the most energy efficient. The whole West is starting to pick up on these maps, the migrations, the storytelling, and we think that's just going to unlock millions of dollars for conservation, and we'll hopefully start to reverse some of these population declines that have been happening for decades. The longer migrating ones are reaching apparently better habitat, and even though they travel further, they're gaining more fat in the summer and maintaining more fat in the winter, which means they're reproducing better, and so they come to outnumber the other strategies. These stories have to live in the public if we're going to keep making progress.
Resilient. It shows how incredible these critters are and how faithful they are to these corridors. We're going to talk about a different situation, the unfortunate situation that I hope nobody runs into, but inevitably somebody does every year. And joining me today, I've got Bryant Birch from Green River, Wyoming, and I've got Todd Redmond from Lyman, Wyoming. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you both here. You guys, good hunting buddies, have been hunting for years. There's no greater experience than those that are made in the field, in my mind. Yeah, let's talk about it, Todd. Tell me what led up to the actual event that occurred that ultimately resulted in a Black Hawk from Cheyenne flying, refueling in Riverton, and then ultimately making its way to northwest Wyoming and evacuating you off the mountain.
In Wyoming, like you mentioned, you never know what's going to happen. Things can change on a dime, especially in that country with weather conditions and just how remote it is. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be ready for the worst.
When that sun comes up, I've never been a part of something so beautiful before. When you come over, you just don't, you didn't know those elk were there till you are on the cliff, and then you hear bugles and you look over and there's elk everywhere. I checked him out and he could barely stand. And I think he made the decision, hey, we need to finish this elk, like Todd.
But you
can't
at
move.
This point, you've maintained consciousness the whole time.
Yeah. Up to this point.
He was struggling, you could tell. And I kept thinking, he's pretty tough. I've seen him in some pretty tough situations, but he's very tough. And I'm just seeing his eyes. I knew it was not good.
It rattled his cage.
It was not good. I knew he was in pain. And to go back a little bit, one thing that Todd and I think it's just having just this close friendship, one thing we always do every morning before we leave, we say a prayer. We pray that we'll be safe and that we'll enjoy the time and take care of, that everything will be taken care of. And I know that was a huge help to this whole situation. A lot of people are spiritual in whatever ways they are. I think that was one thing that we always just fall back on, is we believe that was one of the big miracles that got us through this.
Sometimes you have that choice taken away from you, and that's why you've got to be ready and be with good people, have resources that you can call for aid if you need it. But you don't want to stop. You don't want to have delays. That's when bad things happen.
This is where I think brains need to overcome stubbornness. I should have called the day it happened.
Yeah. Sometimes we get ourselves in worse situations because of our pride. And in this case, I put them in a worse situation because of my pride. No animal's worth your life. No, I'll tell you that. It doesn't matter how big a bull, big a buck, not worth your life.
We learned the hard way a little bit. You should never have that kind of attitude, because this is the one thing that saved our lives, saved his life. And if any piece that I would go back and say is the number one thing you pack, it's the Garmin.
Mule deer traverse from mountains high across the plains beneath the sky. They roam for miles along a trail, since those before them did as well. It might just be what they do best, migrating far across the West.
Ah, that is beautiful. And that is a direct excerpt from the Magnificent Mule Deer, that being narrated by the author, Mary Fichtner. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Also joining us on this podcast, a very special podcast, very excited to be able to present this, is Mary's daughter, Rosalind Fichtner, as well, who is the illustrator of this great book. We need to get young children off electronics, get them outside, get them enjoying the wonderful wildlife resources and natural resources that we have. It starts with measures like this, and I think that's very profound. This fills a void, I think, because there isn't this type of level of publication specific to an iconic critter like mule deer. It's a pledge. It's a commitment that we're going to do good things for mule deer. And on the book, I'm awestruck over the idea that the actual original pieces of art, for what I believe to just be a stellar success for you with this book and its efforts.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley Fanatic.